My name is Peter Hilton. That's enough about me. Today I'm going to talk about developer happiness. This matters a lot, for obvious reasons. Now, I was in this room before lunch for Holly's talk, and there were some Norwegians in the front row. Are you here? Do we have any Norwegians? There were Norwegians, right. Well, in case you weren't in Holly's talk, she was rude about Norway when it is in fact Yamel's fault, and you know all about that. I would just like to say that I am not going to say anything rude about Norway in this talk. This is a talk about, well, this is an experience report, in fact, from a team working for a Norwegian company last year. I don't speak Norwegian particularly well, so let's do this together. So we're going to learn a couple of words in Norwegian today to start with, just to warm you up. This is the ultimate bug management system. And on the left, we have the word fixe, which means fix, obviously. In the middle, we have the word prioritere, which means prioritize. And then on the right, it says fix det nå, which means fix it now. Now, this is the summary of what I'm going to talk about today. But I just want you to enjoy this as well. So please repeat after me. Come on, everybody. Fix det nå. Fix det nå. Yeah, it feels good. Actually fixing the bugs now, which is what it says, is also very satisfying. Now, this is not my infographic. The original actually is not even Norwegian. The original is in a spicy spelling variation called Swedish. This comes from Yassau Sundman in Stockholm. Do we have any Swedes in the audience? We have Swedes as well. Excellent. Sorry about the Norwegian. For the rest of you, those of us who speak neither language, this is a very cute representation of the simplest imaginable system for managing bugs. A system not in the sense of a piece of software, but a process. In theory, a zero bug policy means implementing this process. You just fix the bug straight away, or you delete the bug report. There is no third option. So how hard could this be? Before I get further, I do want to clarify what I mean when I say zero bug policy. The notion of a zero bug policy is somewhat controversial, sometimes, some people. It should be obvious that nobody is suggesting that there shall be software that never has bugs, that there shall be no bugs. That's obviously not what this is about. But my key claim is that zero bugs is a reasonable target. So it's a target, not a policy. It's what we would aim for, a vision, if you like. So in fact, the name zero bug policy is a terrible name. It's really the name for a bug management system, as depicted on the previous slide. And it's a system for achieving this target of having zero bugs. Now, the controversy I've experienced, this means something to me because there was a time when I was told that talking about a zero bug policy was ridiculous and unprofessional. A manager shouted at me for this, that this was a stupid thing to talk about. So I sort of ignored it for some time. Eventually I realized that indeed it's a naming problem. Naming things is hard, who knew? So with that context, I want to kind of dive into our story. Like I said, this is an experience report. Now, I believe that experience reports are very valuable in our industry because everything about software development in practice, well, it depends. Most of what you hear is presented, you listen to podcasts, read blog posts, go to conferences. Sometimes we like to pretend that we're talking about the whole industry, but in practice, it always depends on a more specific context than that. So my claim is not that this would work for you, because I don't know you or your team, but I do want to tell you that this is an experience report of something that worked one time for one team last year in one particular company. Your mileage may vary. Now, because this is our team's story, I want to introduce you to who's involved. In this context, it's quite a small team. That's the first thing to notice. Very distributed. So this is a fully remote team, no office. I've not ever met all of these people in person. And It's mostly a story about the developers and myself. I'm the product manager in this story, and the designers. There was also a CTO and a part-time agile coach, but they're not on the picture. They were not involved day to day. And I think, in fact, in this story, most of the glory is the developers' glory. They did the hard part. So this is who? This is the team. What is the software? The software is a Norwegian web shop launched for Norwegian consumers in autumn 2023. Consumers who mostly use mobile phones. So most of them use mobile instead of desktop. Hardly any of them use the English version of the website, maybe 1% or something. This is very much a local thing in Norway. Now, the web shop is not the hard part of the software. So just to give you a sense of what we're doing, it's a smallish web shop that sells 20-something products. Not rocket science. But it's a circular service, and what this is trying to describe is that you get these containers of soap at home, you use them, and then you send them back, and we clean them, and we reuse them, and then sell them out again. So the web shop is the easy part. The hard part is the circular supply chain, because it's a circular service. The containers get reused. And circular economy, it turns out, requires brand new software infrastructure. So we're doing supply chain from scratch, and that's kind of complicated. So that's our software context. And like I said, small company, 20 employee startup last year with this sustainability mission. So already this is quite a different context to where a lot of you work. A lot of you will probably work for a bank on a large team. I mean, realistically, this is a Java conference. Or maybe anybody here work in a bank? Actually, so not so many. 99% of bank-employed Java developers don't go to conferences, I guess. They're the dark matter of the Java developer community. But large numbers of Java developers. But what I want to focus on, small company, startup, relatively recent launch, so not very much legacy, not very much code, and a lot of autonomy. I mentioned we're a fully remote team. Being fully remote comes with working async and having a lot of autonomy and getting to try out interesting experiments, like when we decided to get started with having a zero bug policy. Now, how we got into this topic, the timing was good. Everybody on the team was interested at about the same time. If we go back into the depths of the past, you find on the internet the Joel test. It's still there. It's a web page. It's not really a blog post because blogs hadn't been invented yet in 2000 when this was published. Who's heard of the Joel test? Almost nobody, right? So this is a super long time ago. Joel Spolsky, who later got involved in Stack Overflow, which you probably have heard of, he wrote this list as a kind of a test to ask your potential employer when you're interviewing for a job, because you don't want to work for a company that doesn't do these things. Right? That's his pitch. Now, a lot of these, even at the time, were kind of shocking. The idea that there would be companies that don't use source control. I mean, that would be super weird. So what we all did, those of us who read this web page back at the time, was to look at. We weren't at a job interview that day, so instead of asking in the interview, we would think about our current job where we worked. And generally score quite a few points if you work somewhere sensible, realize that, yeah, actually maybe we could have more powerful computers, the best tools money can buy, and we would be happier developers. But very few of us could score the point for, do we always fix the bugs before we write new code? Now, this played on my mind for years, because back when this was published, I was working as a developer back then already. But it wasn't until years later that I was reminded of the topic by the infographic I started with from Yasar Sunman, the fix it now or delete it. And so it was in 2021 that I wrote a blog post about maybe it would be cool to do a zero bug policy. I had some conversations with colleagues about it. We all agreed that this would be a fun thing to try. We would totally not get away with doing this now. So I wrote the blog post as a sort of outlet, like this is what I'd like to do, but let's go back to work tomorrow. The blog post got picked up at the beginning of last year by this team in Norway. Not a coincidence. At the point at which the team in a retrospective put in the notes, hey, maybe we should adopt a zero bug policy, that's when I was interviewing for this job. And the guy I'm interviewing with, who I knew already, he'd shared my blog post in the team. Because somebody, I don't know, it came from somewhere. Anyway, so context is that beginning of last year, the team had started talking about it. It came up again a month later. It didn't go away. They wanted to talk about it again. 1st of March last year was my first day on the team. And coincidentally, we had a retro on my first day, 1st of March. And we discussed it again. And I thought, wow, maybe this is my chance to finally try this thing that I've always wanted to do. And I wasn't really sure, I'm new in the job. I'm not sure what I'm going to get away with, what's going to be worthwhile. So I waited until we got a bit more information about the situation. The next thing that happened in April, we realized we were going to be starting a marketing campaign. And in April, we started getting a lot of new bug reports because we'd had quite low traffic on the website until then. But when you start doing adverts and television and on the metro and the public transport, you get a lot more users. We realized that, yeah, maybe our testing was not great and we're getting a lot of bug reports. So bug reports tell that you've got a problem. The bugs themselves were really painful. We were spending a lot of time on support requests. We didn't have a big customer support team. We didn't really have a customer support team at that point. And so this was costing a lot of time from everybody to resolve these problems, and quite fundamental bad problems, like the customer tried to buy something on the web shop and it didn't work. Keeping track of what was working today and what we'd fixed since yesterday was kind of tricky. Again, that cost more time. And none of us enjoyed discussing this situation. This was quite a meeting-hostile organization, working fully remote and async. So we didn't really want to have lots of meetings. So we weren't having lots of meetings discussing the bugs, but it was kind of necessary. And personally, as the product manager, I had this additional pain, is that I wanted to not be thinking about bug reports. I wanted to be thinking about how can we get new paying customers. And I wanted to do the kind of experiments that you heard about this morning from Trish. So when Trish G this morning sort of said, look, focus on the outcomes, like more paying customers, do those experiments. Now, if your hypothesis is that we change this feature and we'll get more new customers, and then you do something and it doesn't work, it could be that the feature didn't work or they didn't achieve that goal. But in our case, well, we've got bugs. So actually, we just know that the software is buggy. The bugs invalidate these experiments. So that was, for me, also a strong motivation. Talking to the developers at the time, they were also kind of interested in the quality of the software. It's often the case, and here as well, that something very new has been rushed in the early stages to kind of get feedback. And so there was definitely technical debt there. There was definitely code that wasn't great. We knew it. We needed to do work on it. So at this point, I'm reminded or saw this reminded of this post I'd seen by J.B. Rainsberger, who talks about technical debt in a slightly different way and poses this question. What if we were to fix that? What if doing that work, improving the software, is a socially acceptable way of expressing our appreciation for each other? Now, we value that. We value sharing our appreciations. There's literally an appreciation Slack channel. And this idea also kind of made me think, actually, this would be maybe a good thing for the team to do. But in particular, where he says, reduce volatility in the marginal cost of features, that sounds to me like predictable support effort. And that was a big pain for us. So that's something we really wanted to improve. So I liked the what if posed here. The team did as well. And so this kind of pushed the discussion forward, this idea that it might be a good thing, plus the pain of having these bugs, of having stuff not working, and this just making our day-to-day work difficult and, most of all, less fun. Now, at this point, we got a bit stuck because we're discussing, okay, how would a zero bug policy work? What would we do? And developers, being developers, were very well trained to ask lots of questions about specific cases. Well, what if we get 2 bugs at the same time, or we've got 3 bugs and we get 2 more? Lots of detailed stuff. And this really kind of slowed us down. And I mean, you can answer these questions. We thought about it. We thought about how would this policy work? How would we behave? But I realized we weren't really going anywhere. We were a bit stuck in this analysis paralysis of talking about how we would proceed. So we did two things to resolve this. The first thing we did was to actually sketch out a vision of what might we achieve if we were to not have all these open bugs and new bug reports every day. So I've mentioned predictable support effort. I've mentioned that we didn't want to spend lots of time discussing and prioritizing open bugs because that, like I said, does not spark joy. And also, from a product management perspective, I wanted meaningful feedback from feature adoption. I want to know whether people like it, not just whether it's broken. And collectively, these are, to me, developer happiness issues. So having goals helped us move forward, focus on where we thought we might go and not so much on these sort of detailed discussions. The second thing that helped was to realize that this needed to be in itself an experiment, something where we had a hypothesis that we would achieve one or more of these goals and that we would spend some time on this, which we weren't specific about, and that we would kind of get to this better place. But when we talked about the experiment, and this is a team experiment in how we work, it was also clear that this would have to be a safe experiment. We had to feel comfortable. And so that's where perhaps a lot of the questions were coming from, a feeling of uncertainty about how might people react to unpleasant situations with handling new bugs. So having established some goals and realized that this was in fact safe to try, we realized that we were ready to find out instead of analyzing it too much. So we adopted a policy and we started fixing bugs. So this is the kind of the talking phase. It was time to actually do something. This phase probably took a couple more months, and although we'd started fixing a lot of bugs during April last year, 1st of May was pretty much when we started working on the bug backlog. So getting started was complicated. There were lots of different discussions we had. Proceeding from there and actually starting to fix bugs, in a way, was more simple, but it was also hard work. So what happened next was we fixed lots of bugs. Now, when I was making these slides, I had high hopes that a burn-up chart would be really cool visualization here. But this is not a very interesting chart. I was very disappointed. It does show a couple of things. It does show that we fixed quite a lot of bugs. So with 6 developers until the end of the year, the developers fixed 252 bugs. It also highlights that as fast as we fixed bugs, we would find new bugs. That's an important takeaway when you do something like this. Fixing bugs leads to bug reports and more bug fixing. This is actually not strange. If nobody's fixing bugs, then what's the point of reporting new ones? But if people start fixing them, then reporting new ones actually starts to feel quite worthwhile, especially if it looks like all of the known bugs have been fixed. So if I report this one, it's maybe going to get fixed. So indeed, we started to do a lot more testing, which is a good thing, highly recommended. But we kept finding new bugs to fix. And gradually, but over the course of a whole year, we kind of caught up. Anyway, this is not the helpful visualization. So let's look at the same data in a different way. This shows, in vertical bars, the number of bugs we fixed per week. So these are not particularly big numbers. The scale is on the left. So we mostly fixed around 5 bugs a week, plus or minus. There were a couple of peaks where we fixed more than 10 to 15 bugs in 1 week. So that's including some pretty small ones. Remember, the context here is 6 developers, although 5 really, because 1 only worked on DevOps stuff and not this stuff. So the workload varied quite a lot, and there were times when it was quite intense. The blue line shows the number of open bugs on the first day of the month. It's not very detailed data, but it just shows you that from time to time it went up, and from time to time it went down. Okay, that's not me. Hold on a sec. We're back. So I think the important thing about the blue line is that we started to keep up with new bug reports, and we never at any point in this story had a very large number of open bugs. Beginning of May, a year ago, it got above 15, but that's not like a really big number. I mean, do any of you suspect that you've got a bug tracker with more than 100 open bugs in it? Hands up. Have you ever worked in that scenario? Right, so some of you have. That's again, quite a different scenario. Here, the whole time, it felt quite manageable. You know, we'd start each month with a not too scary number of bugs. We'd fix them, and we would keep on fixing them. So we might have started the month with 15 open bugs, but we fixed a lot more during May last year. So, to recap, I mentioned the end of April, start of May, we had this marketing campaign that generated a lot of traffic, and therefore a lot of bug reports. This is the period when we decided that we would only work on fixing bugs. So this is a big thing to ask a development team to say, right, until further notice, what turned out to be 2 months, we only work on bug fixes. That's hard work. It requires focus. Sometimes it's kind of annoying or maybe not the most fun work. But this is where I started to realize that it worked for the team because we were all doing it together. So it would be very different if only one person on the team spent all of their time fixing bugs and other people were doing other stuff. But by doing it together, I think that made it more acceptable, at least for a couple of months. After 2 months of this, it was clearly a bit much. And also, we kind of fixed the most important bugs. You know, we'd fixed the bugs that stopped customers giving us money, and we had bugs left that weren't necessarily going to be so bad for customers, but we still wanted to fix them. You know, either because we thought they spelled trouble for later, I felt embarrassed as product manager that this thing was not working, you know, or generally we felt that this could be better quality software. So we kept on fixing bugs in the next period for about half of our time. And this again was another couple of months. Now, this was a bit more complicated. In principle, fixing bugs first, but then not always, was a harder story and caused a few more discussions. At one point in the sort of second half of that period, in August last year, one of the developers in a retrospective, you know, put in his kind of sticky note, and I know who this is, I could tell just by rereading it. Zero bugs policy pissed me off this week. A month or so ago, I kind of had a conversation just to get him to remind me what this was about, having correctly identified who it was. And he explained that it just felt like a bad choice in that moment, because at that point, we'd started working on interesting new features that were going to really help customers. But, you know, and he was almost finished on something, wanted to finish it off, but then there's a bug reported, and now he's got to work on that first because of the policy. I mean, that was a good lesson, that frustration came up. It was good to discover that our retros were working and surface that discussion. I also realized, especially in hindsight, that this kind of thing didn't really happen very much. I don't have 10 more examples of this kind of frustration. So mostly it was okay, but indeed, it's more complicated when you're mixing the work like that. So it was more important to be able to read the room at the edge cases. Now, we and still have a really good agile coach that would facilitate these discussions. That's very valuable in making sure that we understand and address this kind of feeling. Anyway, so back to the work. After this sort of essentially 5-month period, like the bug fixing had really started in April, at the end of August last year, we reached Zero Bug Day. And this was a big deal. This was a big celebration because we didn't know starting out whether we would actually get there. But for the first time, there were no open bugs, and there wasn't anything that we knew about that we wanted to fix. You know, there had been times where I thought, yeah, there is actually this bug that I haven't reported yet, but as long as there's still some in the list, I don't really need to. You know, and every time it got down to there's only one open, well, I better add the one that I know about. That's cheating in a way, but that's the reality. Reaching Zero Bug Day, though, was a very important milestone because that's where everything changed. So the next part of the story is the period after Zero Bug Day, and that's the period that I call Zero Bug Policy Success. So that's in the last part of the year, that's not a particularly long period. So this year I've been updating the data, to show on the same scale, 0 to 20 bugs, how many did we fix each week since then. So since the beginning of September, essentially since Zero Bug Day, we've had progressively fewer bugs to fix, and weeks in which we were not fixing bugs, and months where we'd started the month with 0 open bugs. In fact, 1st of March, 1st of April, and 1st of May this year, coincidentally, there were 0 open bugs on the start of the month. Since March, we've fixed, what's the scale here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bugs in the last 2 months, which is not a large number. And so this is a very different feel on the team. This is the payback. This is a period in which we haven't had to be talking about bugs. We've known what's broken, which is generally nothing. Mostly there were only 1 or 2 open bugs at a time when they did pop up. And this has just made everything just feel easier, in fact. So lots of things have got better. To show this sort of data in a different way, I made a little calendar for last month. The smiley faces are days on which, at no point during that day, was there an open bug. On the other days, for a while, so we actually had 2 bugs last month that were reported and fixed. 2 different bugs, so I gave them different symbols. We didn't fix these particularly quickly. I mean, I don't feel great about that. The second one, the ladybird, the fix was written the same day, and then it waited 6 days for a code review. That's a whole different topic about trunk-based development. So if you've ever successfully stopped that happening, please come and talk to me afterwards. But the highlight here is that mostly, it turns out that it's a lot easier to keep things tidy, bug-free, when that's your starting point. I'm not a huge fan of the analogies of anything to do with software development, but I like cooking, and it's the same in a kitchen. If your kitchen is not being cleaned for months, it's going to take you a lot of effort to fix that and make it clean and hygienic. But if you get it to that state several times a day, then it's never much work to get it back to a totally clean kitchen. But more importantly, it's a better kitchen to work in. And that's the same here. This is a better environment to code in. So this is what we achieved, the most important thing that we've achieved, and that it turns out we can maintain. I'd like to add a little bit more context about how we work. Not that tools are particularly important, but maybe it helps. So we use Slack. We have a bugs channel where all bugs are reported from any source by anybody internally who has access. And that's where we have discussions. Typically, there's a short discussion asking for more information, leads to confirming that, yes, this is a bug, and then we will create a task for the bug. We quite like using emoji in Slack. So at the end of the top line are the emoji we'd use to indicate, oh, somebody's looking at this, we've created a task for this, and this one is now complete, fixed in production. That interaction, usually with customer support, because they often see things first or hear them from customers, that interaction, of course, takes people away from their focused work. So we have a weekly rota for the team to be taking on that first responder role, including the designer and including does the designer do it? Sorry, no, that's wrong. The designer doesn't do it, but as product manager, I do it. I don't have access to the code, so I can't do the same investigation, but I can certainly check that we have a clear description of a problem and whether I can reproduce it. We don't use a proper bug tracker, if you like. We use Notion for everything, all of our documentation. And of course, it turns out that when you have a very small amount of work in progress and you don't have lots of bugs, then you don't need a very complicated board view. So we use a board. We have a column for bug inbox. That really highlights if there's anything there. Usually it's just empty. Actually, usually it's just hidden because we don't need an empty column. But something appearing there is how we know, okay, that's what we're going to work on next. It's not so relevant. The other numbers show the number of items in progress. In that column. A couple of tasks in review, 3 in progress. 15 kind of up next, ready for work. That's a relatively large number for us. I tend to, as product manager, keep that under 10. but we were just pivoting to a new project at that point. So we don't have a big backlog. We don't have a complicated tracking, amount of work. And so that's why we're not using a dedicated issue tracker. Turns out that it's nice not to need one. Okay, so that's sort of what happened and how we felt about it at the time. I'd like to move on to reflecting a little bit about what I learned for us. Now, I'm not promising that this is relevant for you, but I want you to think about whether it might be. Zero bug policy success exists. So given that it exists, the next question is, what's it to you? As I explained, the transition period from deciding to do this to having zero open bugs for the first time, that was hard work. But also, the infographic I started with, the simple fix it now or delete it, only works once you reach zero bugs. Until then, you've still got a backlog to deal with. We started not because we knew how hard it would be, but because we didn't know how hard it would be. But we had a team that was up for it, and we stuck with it, and it worked out okay. So the transition was hard work. But what if we had hundreds of open bugs to start with? I don't know. Maybe that would have been overwhelming. Maybe that would have blocked us from starting. Of course, there is a nuclear option that you can consider at that point. If you want to adopt a zero bug policy and start dealing with bugs as they arrive, as reported by customers, you could just delete your backlog. If you've got a legacy system with a large backlog, this might be your only option here, because the alternative just might be too overwhelmingly depressing. And it turns out finding bugs to work on was not the problem, right? Because your users and customers tell you about them. So that's why we don't really need a backlog. If you delete the backlog, if you're using Jira, maybe deleting them is a little bit rash, but just create another project that nobody else has access to and just move them all there and say you deleted them, but with your fingers crossed behind your back. So you could undo it if you're about to get fired for this, autonomy you've found. Anyway, fixing bugs wasn't the problem, but the bug reports cause problems, right? So if you've got a big backlog, it causes meetings. If you remove the backlog, a lot of those meetings just go away because you don't have bugs to prioritize and talk about. So that's why you should consider this. Now, I've not deleted the backlog. I've not tried this. If you do, you should totally do an experience report about it. It would be great. I would come and listen. Perhaps the most significant thing we learned is the value of only dealing with one bug at a time. So if you remember earlier on, I described how before we got started, we got sidetracked by lots of discussions about what if this complicated scenario happens, and the developers went down the rabbit hole of edge case. Of course, a completely reasonable synonym for edge case is just case. These are things that could happen. But it turns out that once you get to dealing with one at a time, because you generally have 0, 1, or 2 open bugs, and you deal with them case by case, you don't have to invent rules or decide in advance how you would deal with the scenario. You just have, okay, what's this bug? What are we going to do about it? Are we going to fix it or are we not going to fix it? It's a much shorter meeting. And it's a much more interesting discussion because it's concrete instead of abstract. I thought about what I might be telling you that you can do, and without knowing anything else about your context, your team, your organization, and your system, the default answer is that you can't do this too, because any one of these things, you might be missing one of these, and that might be enough to mean you can't do it. You need to be experiencing some pain to be motivated to make some big change like this. If you've got a buggy system but nobody cares, there's no pain, then nobody's going to be interested in a big effort like this. If you've got a big backlog and the only way forward would be to delete it, but you realize that that would be a career-limiting move, then again, that could be a reason to not do this and not proceed. Perhaps everybody's happy with the quality of the software, despite the number of bugs. Again, it would require a collective will to improve on that, to have better quality software. That's really what we're talking about in quality. It's like, are there bugs? And also, part of what made me realize that last year was my chance to try this out is that unlike previous jobs and where I'd worked as a developer, I'm the product manager. And in the past, the product manager was often the person who would block some suggestion that we would only work on bug fixing for months and not implement any features. But this time around, that was me, and I thought that this was actually quite a good idea. In hindsight, it was an excellent idea because what we wanted to do at the time was increase conversion from people who visited the website to people who would buy the stuff. And we couldn't really start working on that until we'd fixed the bugs because we wanted to do this. And then afterwards, we added some things that would help customers, help visitors become paying customers. When I looked at the data, in the autumn, actually I saw that the period when we fixed the bugs had a bigger impact than the features we added afterwards, which should not be a surprise. Consumers are kind of allergic to buggy software, especially when that software is asking them to spend money. So think about how many points you get here and whether these issues or another issue would block you from trying this out. I would also like to return now to the infographic, because at this point I started reflecting on how this related to kind of our experience here, and realized that way back on the first project where I ever wrote Java code, which is so long ago I'm not going to tell you when it was, a colleague and I made this flowchart of our bug handling process to kind of share with everybody and show how we would handle bugs. And we printed it out and we put it on the wall in the room we wrote the code in. It was complex. And this is not complex. In fact, decades of simplification of how we work have been replacing these complex flowcharts, complex decision-making, rules, written down rules. These rules have been replaced with conversations between people. Even if those conversations are uncomfortable, it's a more sophisticated way to work. And when I talked to Yasao, who made this, that she admitted that it's deliberately cute and non-threatening, because in fact, doing this implies having difficult conversations, and you need to be a certain kind of team to be able to do that. So while I didn't particularly want to use the A word, not that one, the other one, I would like to quote the Agile practitioner, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, because he said on this topic of fixing bugs and processes, it seems that perfection is attained not when there's nothing more to add, but when there is nothing more to take away. And so that's progress in how we work. It becomes simpler. So that's our experience here as well. But simpler does not mean easier. Let's wrap up. I told you that getting started required everybody's support. We really couldn't have got started if we hadn't had that. We had to understand whether there were any objections, whether we were taking risks we shouldn't take, and we had to conclude that it would be safe. We needed the motivation to do it. Now, I had thought that maybe what we needed to get started was the psychological safety to do something risky. I put that to Yasao Sunman. I asked her, is that a prerequisite here? Should that be on the reasons why you can't do it? And she disagreed, because she's done this with more teams, and said, actually, having pain from bugs is more important than whether the team has sort of some measure of psychological safety. Moreover, how do you build psychological safety on the team? You work together in a healthy way, and you take on a tough challenge. So as long as everybody's going to be nice about it, and you're not going to have any assholes in the room, then doing some project like this, achieving a zero bug policy, would be a really good way to build psychological safety on a team. It's been good for our team. So I can second that. So indeed, everyone had questions before we started. Overthinking things is an excellent developer trait. It just wasn't very helpful this time, so we needed to move on. I'm not entirely sure how much the shared vision, the list of goals helped. Maybe just writing down goals was the product manager in me, so I'm unsure. Maybe. The transition phase was hard work. But once we got to having 0 bugs for the first time, everything got much easier. And so now we work in a happier place where we don't worry as much about bugs, and we talk a lot less about them. And I can highly recommend that. Thank you very much. Having talked about this before, I would not be surprised if you have questions. There is some time to ask questions if you are not feeling shy. If you're feeling shy, wait a few minutes and then come and talk to me afterwards. That's also good. But does anybody have a question now? I'm going to have to... OK, let's come here where I can see you. What's your question at the front?
So regarding kind of flowchart, like either you fix it now or you delete it, when you're deleting kind of like the bug reports, that's a bug that's minor that exists that you're going to leave alone and basically say, like this will stay in the software. Did you ever get to a position where some of those minor bugs either compounded, became bigger things, or later down the line they would then prioritize again? Is that possibly dangerous? This idea of like ignoring things that exist?
OK, so the question was, if we decide to not fix a bug and just ignore the bug report and delete it, might this situation happen several times in a row and a series of small bugs will compound and become a problem? Well, we decided, well, 2 things. Firstly, although it's kind of right there on the infographic, we hardly ever delete the bug report. I looked it up. It's less than 1 in 10, more like 1 in 20. So this is not something that happens very much. The idea of this happening several times in a row is sufficiently unlikely that I'm unsurprised to tell you that this hasn't come up. And so in this case-by-case handling, that would be the first time we'd think about this. But if it did happen, I guess we'd say, yeah, we've seen parts of this bug in the past. I guess we should fix it this time. That's all. No biggie. Next question, yeah, in the middle. OK, the question, how do we prioritize this towards the business stakeholders? So first, I did a power move, which I'm not necessarily recommending, which is I became the business stakeholder. So about 8 years ago, I stopped writing code, and now I'm the product manager. So that's me. I just decide. The second part of the question, which does work for you as the developer, and also is a good way to talk to your product person if that's not you, is to talk about the outcomes, as Trish talked about this morning. So don't talk about bugs, talk about money not earned from customers, for example, and say, actually, maybe we should take more of our customers' money. Talk about the business outcomes. That's how you do it. Did you have a question at the front?
Yeah, I was wondering if sometimes you feel like you are about to go backward because it's kind of frustrating because you have like huge features that needs to go out. I tried this experiment like a while ago, and we managed to the 0 bug policy for a few months, and we want back to our old habits.
So is the question, do I worry about that? Yeah. OK, so the question is, do we worry about slipping back into a situation where it gets out of hand and suddenly the number of bugs is going up again? I guess I do, but also I'm not generally a stressed person. And so I'm happy to report that the longer we go in this sort of success period, the less I worry about this. It seems, if it hasn't happened in the last 6 months, then maybe we're good now. I mean, the thing that I put in place is that I do have to remind the team from time to time that, no, we are going to fix the bug first. You didn't need to ask me. Yes, everything is prioritized that way. We are still doing the policy, and to kind of keep the discipline. So the discipline of actually fixing the bug first is important. And as for rolling out a big feature that could generate 20 bug reports, sounds like a bad idea to roll out the big feature. So feature flags, small releases, small steps. And I guess that's probably something that we do for that reason. So there might be a big release towards customers, but we'd use the feature flag to do that in small steps to check that we're going in the right direction. You've already asked a question, so let's ask you. Okay, so the question was, how disruptive is it to drop things and fix the bug? So I was not concrete, I was not clear about this, sort of deliberately, because it's an edge case. When there's a bug report, nobody drops anything. That's actually not what we do. There's one person on the support rotation who responds to a Slack message, typically, and confirms that there is a bug. This will take them 5 minutes, and then they'll go back to work. What's happened now is we've got a bug report in our bug inbox. Everybody finishes what they're working on. That is the next task that will start. In theory, if it's a critical issue, then we'd drop stuff. But that hasn't happened for some months. That's pretty rare. So maybe a few times a year, yes, drop things. But that's also sufficiently interesting that the whole team, does this, and we'll go into a team programming session, because otherwise everybody else will get FOMO. So if something really exciting happens, then everybody's in the room. But that's really not very common. How are we doing? Yeah, more time.
Until we reach this zero bug situation, did you do any effort around the investing in quality itself, so more testing, more automated testing? Did you work on that, or you were just focused on fixing the bugs that existed?
The question is, while we were fixing bugs, did we improve, for example, our automated testing or quality control in general? Yes, absolutely. So I mentioned that there'd been this sort of marketing release, this marketing campaign that kind of kicked off the motivation. What I didn't tell you was that leading up to the marketing campaign, the developers were saying, you really should have told us about this a bit earlier, because we're not ready, and the system's not ready for this. So the fixing bugs period was also the opportunity to massively increase the test coverage. So every bug was fixed kind of well. That's also perhaps why it took so many months. We didn't do the quick fixes. So what was, I guess, in parallel with the story, although strictly speaking it's a separate topic, was we also improved our testing practice. We certainly realized that we needed to, because the amount of known bugs when we started doing this was way smaller than the number of actual bugs. So yeah, that was a good thing to be doing at the same time. Yep, still got time for a couple more. I've been prioritizing the front of the room so I can see, but you've got another question. Okay, so how do we define what is a bug and what's some other kind of change? This is another example of the kind of the edge case discussion. We don't need to define a bug, because what happens now is there's 0 bugs today, and if somebody reports something in the bug channel, then I can do vibe product management, and I can say, no, do I feel like calling this a bug or not? It sort of doesn't matter too much. The difference is really, are we going to fix it, and is it helpful to push it into the bug inbox column and prioritize it that way? And by default, that's what I would do. If there's any suggestion that we should think of it as a bug, it's not going to make anybody happier to try and pretend it's not. I don't need to play those games, because I'm not prioritizing bugs against each other. So actually this question of definition is really, this comes from a place of needing to prioritize, but we don't need to do relative prioritization among bugs. So I don't really have to do that. So we know we have no written definition of bug. Probably the last one. So you've been sticking up your hand. What would you like to ask?
Really I'm relying on another team. How could I follow a 0 bug policy in that situation?
This is not a question I had to answer, because in our scope there is only one team, small company, so there is no other team. So I don't know the answer. I didn't have to come up with that. If that were the case, there are constraints, I guess, things we can't fix, then we would have to we'd have to change the architecture to not have the problem. Or maybe this is a good reason to ignore the bug report. we can't fix it outside our ability. I guess that happens too. So I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for you, but I'm in the lucky situation. I didn't have to do that. Okay, that's time. So for those of you who are desperate for coffee, you're now allowed to go. Thank you for coming to the talk. I'm here all week. Come and ask me more questions. I'd love to talk more about it.